recording. Okay, so today I saw a nice tweet. MI News on Twitter. I mean, I've never seen any of their headlines to be not based on legitimate sources, and I'll prove that in a minute. But we're going to talk about the Ukraine war today. Maybe this is the only source on Facebook that actually has legitimate, serious Ukraine war sorts of updates. Who knows? You know, I have to say this before I even begin. I put I think it was on Jack Posobiec's Twitter. No, it was on a Discord. Somewhere on Discord, I made the statement that eventually Americans are going to thank Putin for embarrassing and delegitimizing their leaders, these shitty leaders that we have in the United States. It may turn out that Putin saves us. Putin has already saved the United Kingdom from Boris Johnson. Be right back. So, so the media goes on and on about Boris Johnson resigning because of all these scandals and this and that and the other. This scandal and that scandal, and they list all the scandals, and they're trying to explain why he resigned. But they know the actual reason why he resigned. The reason Boris Johnson resigned is because it's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. The economy in Britain has gone from bad to worse, just like the rest of the countries in the collective West. Now, from the beginning, Alexander Mercurius posited that they're going to try to divert the real reason from which Boris Johnson resigned. Ultimately, the real reason Boris Johnson resigned, and Alexander Mercurius stated this, and I agree with him 100%, is because of his handling of the Ukraine fiasco, which will be a fiasco for the United States and the UK and Germany and Italy. By the end of the year, I think Boris Johnson is just the first of many political elites to succumb to perhaps one of the greatest political and military and economic blunders in history, which was the sanctions war against Russia. Now, there was already, if you recall, on my YouTube channel, I've covered the inflation since last year when it started in February of 2021. Okay, when the CPI, the official number in the United States, started to really tick up to 0.5% month over month. So I was ahead of the game on that. And the rest of Europe started to see inflation a little bit later. Germany really didn't start to see it in their numbers. I believe, don't quote me on this, until around December. I want to see if this works. I wonder. Oh, I do have desktop audio. Okay, I had to check if I have desktop audio. It was bothering me. So we started seeing inflation pop up in Britain a little bit earlier last year, but really the United States led the way on the inflation because the United States essentially was the main driver of inflation in the world because the United States controls the reserve currency of the world. And the Federal Reserve and also Congress and Trump and then Biden intentionally, maybe in the case of Trump and Biden, not intentionally, but in Congress. But together, the Federal Reserve, the central banks of Europe, and the legislatures and heads of state of the various countries all around the world collectively created this huge inflation problem. But then we had the Ukraine war, okay, and it got worse because Europe basically cut off its own nose to spite its face and semi-banned, not really banned, but semi-banned, forbade Russian imports of energy products and other products. But the reality is they left loopholes in the embargo language and in the enforcement. They've left loopholes that basically allow companies to go through third-party intermediaries in India, which at the end of the day accomplishes nothing. Not that truly embargoing Russian energy would have accomplished anything to begin with other than destroying the economies of Europe. In this case, now that they can import Russian oil from Indian exporters mainly, now they're just getting the same oil and gas at much more expensive prices, only delaying the inevitable collapse and maybe perhaps making it a bit more gradual feeling. These politicians can't think but 2 minutes ahead, and all they can do is react and delay the inevitable failure. Britain's inflation rate after the sanctions began started to skyrocket at an alarming pace. British people are paying twice as much for their electricity bills than they were before the sanctions began. That is a fact. And Boris Johnson, facing this crisis, which was a combination of scandal and the economic crisis, which he in part created, because as head of state, he has been one of the foremost supporters of the sanctions war against Ukraine and the military intervention and proxy war in Ukraine. So Boris Johnson is actually prevented Zelensky in the beginning, by all accounts. I've shown that article on this vlog before, that Boris Johnson intervened when Zelensky and the Russians were coming to the beginnings of a deal. And he came in, promised him the world, and convinced Zelensky to withdraw from the negotiations. And after that, because Russia immediately pulled back troops in and around Kiev, or Kiev. I forgive me for saying Kiev. It's Kiev. So they pulled troops back, which really they wanted to pull those troops back anyway. They just needed a good excuse. Those troops around places like Bucha, the place with the infamous, still uninvestigated and unconfirmed war crime, which had not been investigated, not confirmed. But a lie travels around the world twice before the truth makes it around the world once. So Boris Johnson came and intervened in those negotiations, and really that was the end for Ukraine. Right then and there, back in March in Istanbul, Turkey, the end was when the end for the country of Ukraine. Perhaps it won't even be called Ukraine after this. If there's a Ukraine after this is said and done, it's going to be a puppet state. That was the end. And Boris Johnson, with his unwavering support of these sanctions, made the energy crisis in Great Britain cataclysmic. That's why Boris Johnson resigned. That's why he resigned. But the media is going to come up with all of these excuses, and they've done that with other things. When they were wrong about the lockdowns, they come up with all these cockamamie excuses. No, you were wrong about the lockdowns. You pushed the lockdowns. And the people in the media who did push the lockdowns, as Eric July said a long time ago, and I totally agree with him, they should be in jail. People who pushed those lockdowns, especially in the media, who put pressure on our politicians, and the politicians who actually implemented them should be in jail. Because that's another thing that caused the inflation crisis, were the lockdowns. Really, it seems almost as if our policymakers did every conceivable thing they could to create an inflation crisis. Now, I'm not one to believe in those kinds of conspiracies. Seriously, I'm not. Because I always keep in the back of my mind, having worked in the government, that the government, above all things, is incompetent. Governments around the world, bureaucracies, okay, they're incompetent. People get promoted by absolutely failing in their jobs. They fail upwards. I've heard that term a few times this week. So Boris Johnson was the first domino to fall. And he's not going to be the last this year. I don't think Zelensky's going to be. If he is de jure president of Ukraine, he's going to be de jure president of Ukraine in another country, probably in Miami. He'll be officially out of London. That's where the Ukrainian government in exile. They're gonna invoke images of the Polish government in exile and say, this is the Ukrainian government in exile. You have to love them. And they're gonna maybe they'll actually bring up the name of Witold Pilecki, which is one of my favorite people of all time. You know, they'll say Witold Pilecki was part of the Polish government in exile. Zelensky's like the new Witold Pilecki. First time in, out of a handful of times in the last 70 years, have they ever mentioned Witold Pilecki, one of the greatest war heroes in the history of the world. But they'll bring him up. I just probably gave him the idea. There's got to be a spook somewhere watching this. And he'll say, wow, that's a damn good idea. We should compare Zelensky to Witold Pilecki. Then we can bring up this story and it'll be fun. Whatever. So Zelensky's going to be not a de facto leader, head of state of Ukraine anymore by the end of this year. Maybe by the end of summer. And then like with the lockdowns, like with Russiagate, like with the vaccine mandates, all of these dumb nuts that put the Ukraine flag on their wall, eventually they'll start taking them off. They'll pretend the Ukraine war never happened because, once again, they've been proven that they're nothing but dupes. The next domino to fall may be at the midterms with the Democrats. We'll see. I think they got tricks up their sleeves, so I'm not ready to call that one yet. I'm not ready to. The whole idea that this is an easy Republican victory, I'm not ready to call that one yet. These people are fighting for their political survival here. They're going to pull out all the stops. Okay, but they're in a much weaker position, it's true, than they were. As far as the Democrats in the United States, they're in a much weaker position than they were in 2020. Really, it's kind of the perfect storm of political catastrophes facing them. But I still can't write them off. I wonder where Podesta is. John Podesta has been really quiet. It seems like whoever the party leadership is in the Democrats, that they seem to have abandoned Hillary Clinton as a prospect. Maybe because John Podesta is so closely tied with her. And then you got, a lot of people are kind of going into hiding because they're afraid that if the Republicans take over in this year, Elias and those kinds of people, they probably are wondering maybe they should get a house overseas while the Republicans control Congress, because, they're all going to be subpoenaed in congressional investigations. So they're all very quiet. All the Comeys. Comey hasn't tweeted. I haven't heard about him tweeting in a while. Hillary Clinton's really quiet. I think maybe she's worried about the Republicans taking over. So people like her believe the Republicans will take over, but I'm still not ready to make that call yet. I can't, because after 2020, I'm a little bit gun shy. I'm a little bit skittish at this point. So anyway, I think I've made my point, the first point, that Boris Johnson resigned is the first domino to fall of many this year over the Ukraine. It's going to be called now the Ukraine blunder. That's what this was, the Ukraine blunder, and it's going to be epic. It's going to take out Germany's government, maybe Italy's government, definitely France, definitely. I think France is done with elections for the year, but they already got their asses handed to them. So now Macron is a lame duck. So it may get Bolsonaro reelected, because as BRICS in Brazil, since Brazil is doing the right thing, basically, Bolsonaro might get, and the citizens of Brazil start to see what's happening in Europe and the United States, and they see Bolsonaro, who took a good stance, who took a reasonable stance in this whole affair, and then they see that he gets reelected. That would be cataclysmic for the global, the liberal world order, as they call it. Think about it. Okay, so what I really wanted to talk about today was this that I saw, which was back. I don't know if I showed this yet, but Zelensky fires. So I saw this on MI News. I was talking about this a minute ago. I got totally sidetracked, but I think it was a good sidetrack because it feeds into this. So Zelensky fires Ukraine ambassadors to Germany, India, Czech Republic, Norway, and Hungary, according to the media. So the first article I found is New York Post. New York Post is sufficient. Okay, so New York Post has the headline here. And so basically, Zelensky fired all of these ambassadors from these countries. And then he says, I need more weapons. He's talking about, I need more weapons. He made a statement, I need more weapons. Or they're saying, we need more weapons. So then we have this New York Times article, June 14th, about 2 weeks ago. Now, this is a sort of paving the way piece. It's almost as if they're trying to get ahead of the story, which is going to be that, eventually they're trying to prepare their audience, it seems, for the eventual shift in narrative to we need to make peace with Russia and settle the Ukraine matter and give Russia what it wants. This article was talking about the basically the okay, so how it works with the New York Times and Washington Post is these newspapers have lots of connections to government, to political actors, to corporate actors, and really the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, those big ones, Chicago Tribune, they've become sort of big advertising catalogs for various special interests, and they all pay for these articles through sponsorships. And so the New York Times, you know, along with this point, the New York Times has a lot of government contacts, and basically this article is Eric Schmidt, okay, got a bunch of anonymous government officials to really give him some information on what's going on in Europe and what's the feeling in Europe, what are the European political actors saying and doing behind the scenes with regards to Ukraine. And in this article, the New York Times says, but France, Italy, and Germany, among the continent's biggest and richest countries, are anxious about a long war or one that could become frozen in a stalemate. They are also nervous about the possible damage to their own economies as countries in Europe grapple with rising inflation and gas prices. So here the New York Times is basically admitting that political actors and advisors and people close to the ruling administrations in these countries are worried about the political consequences of the inflation that came about because of the sanctions, the extra inflation, because there already was inflation before that. So that means that in this article, U.S. officials talking to New York Times are saying, well, we're all rah, Ukraine, and we're not going to give it up. And that's because the United States is kind of the ringleader in this, so there's no point into them giving it up. It's do or die for the national security state, as Jacob Dreisen said. So then this is June 14th. And then what happens a couple weeks later? Boris Johnson resigns because of inflation and rising gas prices. Now, we have to remember that this whole thing with Boris Johnson started when his main finance minister resigned and said Boris Johnson's economic policies are making the country worse off. And then he wrote a letter and he resigned. He's some Indian guy. There's a lot of very competent Indian people from the Indian subcontinent in Great Britain, probably the best resource they have. That's not racist. That's actually a compliment. I mean, their culture is beautiful. That's why they are who they are, the culture, and it is a beautiful culture with strong values. So this guy, finance minister, he resigns last week, and he says, maybe earlier this week, and he says this economic policy, and he couldn't say Ukraine sanctions, but he implied that in a statement that the Ukraine sanctions were part of the problem. He resigned, and that caused a big buzz. And then other government ministers said, if you don't resign, Boris, and these are the permanent high-ranking bureaucrats, and they're saying, we're going to resign if you don't resign right now, okay, because they're concerned about their jobs. If the whole ship sinks and there's, who knows, God knows, a revolution of some sort, or a complete reorganizing of government. So they're ready to say, call it quits. Because what's happening in Britain right now is much worse than what's happening in the United States. They're getting hit really hard because those sanctions deprived Britain of their main source, or one of their main sources, they have a lot of other sources. They're not like Germany. They're not dependent upon Russian oil and gas like Germany, but they were importing a fair amount, and energy prices for people. It's going crazy over there. Alexander Mercurius talks about seeing the food banks. There's like food banks popping up everywhere, and there's lines around these towns in Britain. It must be a sight to see. So Zelensky fires these diplomats, though, that are asking to. So obviously, the Europeans are. So what this is all telling me is that the Europeans are going behind the scenes, going to the Ukrainian ambassadors, and they're saying, "Hey, go tell Zelensky that he needs to make peace. We can't do this much longer. And, it's over. Basically, deal with it. Cope. It's over. Have a nice day. That's our message to you." And so the ambassadors go back to Zelensky. These ambassadors from Germany, India, obviously, because India the whole time has been saying, "What are you guys doing?" Czech Republic, which has tried to be very anti-Russia, Norway, and Hungary. But Germany, the ambassador to Germany is going to the German government is going to Ukraine's ambassador. This is what this means. The German government is going to Ukraine's ambassador and saying something that Zelensky really doesn't like. And I'm willing to bet that something is that, hey, we're not going to be able to do this much longer. You need to make peace or we're out. They're probably saying something like that. We're just going to have to be out and whatever. Because 70% of our natural gas comes from Russia. We can't do it. We're definitely not giving you those Leopard tanks, right? And Zelensky probably, or one of whoever his advisors are, which I would venture to guess there are some spooks from the UK and the United States among his advisors. And apparently Zelensky, I've heard from many credible reports that he is a cokehead, and he's probably sitting around getting geeked out. I'm almost kind of jealous of the guy. He's getting geeked out, living in luxury. But God, this guy's way in over his head. I mean, look at him. He's like 4'2", handsome guy. And apparently he does a lot of, he kind of looks kind of geeked out in this picture. You can tell, though, as a person who maybe might possibly hypothetically, maybe sort of, kind of, have some experience in this regard, maybe, I hear his voice sometimes. It sounds like he snorts a lot of coke, because when you snort a lot of coke, then your voice starts getting like, because that shit's acidic, and it just eats away at your throat and shit. It's really fucking nasty. So, he's probably sitting there snorting coke, and he's just in another world, and the advisors around him are all fucking spooks, real fucking dirtbags probably, and he's like, fire those ambassadors. Fire them. And the Germany ambassador gets fired. Czech Republic is also notable because Czech Republic was definitely in on the sanctions war, rah, 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 Ukraine. I had some run-ins with some Czech spooks on Twitter, and probably, civilian spooks, maybe just weirdos, but I think maybe a spooky kind of spook. So Czech Republic and Germany ambassadors went to Zelensky and said, and was saying things to him that he didn't like. One moment. So that's my theory. I think I've spelled it out. And, that's what happened. So the moral of the story, what happened is Germany's ambassador in Czech Republic, Germany's ambassador, Czech Republic ambassador, and Norway. I didn't even realize Norway was in here. These are three countries that were all in rah 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 Ukraine, all in on the sanctions war. Putin is Hitler. And they all got, these are the Ukrainian ambassadors to Germany, Czech Republic, and Norway, which means they are actually in Germany, Czech Republic, and Norway in embassies there. And the German government, the Czech Republic government, and Norway government, in my opinion, the most likely thing that's going on is these governments are going to those ambassadors and saying, hey, talk to Zelensky, tell him he has to fucking negotiate and end this war so we can end the sanctions, basically. And we have to find a political way out of this because we're all going to get killed in the next elections. And so we're either you negotiate or we're just out of this piece. We're jetting. And those ambassadors, they get on their little nice planes or whatever. They fly to Ukraine. You know, here's Zelensky doing some coke on his mahogany desk with his Nazi guy on this side and the CIA guy on this side. And he's like, and the German ambassador comes up to Zelensky and says, "Sir, we need to make peace. Germany is not going to support us much longer. We can't win this war." And Germany wants to pretend like, you know, they never meant to be sanction Russia or something, right? And Zelensky does that line like that, and then he's like, "You're fired. You're fired. I'm not negotiating." And then the Nazi guy is here like this, and the CIA guy's there with his arm behind his back, and they're just nodding. And that's what really happened. So that's my piece on that. And I think that is enough for now. I am out.